Welcome to Poetic Lines. I'm your host, Elizabeth Lund. Today, my guest is Marjorie Maddox. Marjorie is Professor Emerita of English and Creative Writing at Commonwealth University. She is the Assistant Editor of Presence and hosts the radio program Poetry Moment at WPSU FM. She has published 17 collections of poetry, a collection of stories, and 4 children's books. Marjorie recently published 2 new books of poetry, Seeing Things and In the Museum of My Daughter's Mind, which features artwork by her daughter, Annalie Hafer. The books are intimately connected, as you will hear, yet each is so rich that they deserved a focused conversation. In today's episode, we will spotlight Seeing Things. In those pages, Marjorie writes as witness to the early stages of her mother's dementia and to her daughter's suppression while grappling with her own history of survival. Seeing Things explores the dichotomy of crises and normal days, doubt and hope, truth and lies, grief and relief. Throughout the collection, the speaker describes her experience with clear-eyed compassion as she learns new lessons about seeing clearly and embracing hope. We begin with Marjorie reading several poems from Seeing Things. I know you will appreciate her beautiful language and inspiring insights.
Hello, I'm Marjorie Maddox, and I'm happy to be here on Poetic Lines with Elizabeth to talk about my new book, Seeing Things, which really details relationships between mothers and daughters, the early stages of a mother's dementia, a daughter with her own struggles, and then a woman kind of caught in the middle with memories of her past. Going along with that are the blurry lines of truth and lie that we see in society today. So I'm going to read a few of these poems for you. This first poem, Arise, comes as a response in some ways to the Thailand flood disaster, where several of the soccer boys, you'll remember in 2018, were caught in a cave. But it also speaks to parenting and the fear that we have trying to protect our own children. Arise. July 2018, during the Thailand cave rescue. This is the prayer of all parents, in whispers, in screams, in the near silent gasp seeking to groan outside the dark cave of the dead and the maybe gone. Who can tell what the gruesome air is chewing? The unknown hovering its blind hope too high, too high. This is your language, this mine, lament swirling the undercurrent of belly, twisting the tunnel's neck into blind holes, dead ends, while the now maimed but still living parents beg, arise, come forth. Come forth, the doctor priest I don't know commands my child, who has barricaded herself behind boulders of her own making, too large. Too large, she cries, when the divers swim under, around, instruct her to breathe more deeply the length of her labyrinth that turns now into stones not thrown, but shouldered by the belief of swimmers, by the petitions of ancients, by the precise calculations of strangers, marking the thin space between supplications, rising daily in a common language of grief or relief, swallowed again and again in the narrow cavern of waiting, someone else's words bobbing steadily in the dark night of the cold, the faithful ritual of rescue ready to begin again for this child and this one and even mine, miles below belief and barely breathing. Many of the poems in this book were written at a wonderful residency that I had at VCCA in 2018. And I think it really helped to be in a separate location to write some of these poems. A lot of the book is very difficult to write about and to think about, and just to change locations really helped. Going through and writing these poems really helped a lot. There was a period where we had we were really dealing with crisis after crisis at our house. And this next poem addresses that. When you realize that you actually had a normal day without a crisis. So this next one is called Ode to Normal. And I should say one thing that I did at this residency in the midst of addressing my mother's dementia and all these struggles in the family, um, I reached a point where just for my own sanity, I started writing odes. And so there's a whole series of odes that is woven throughout the book. And I think that helped me kind of lift me up and push me to keep going. And also helps the reader to give kind of a balance of hope in the poem. Ode to Normal. Between crises, normal enters as faint memory. Mannerisms we knew once upon a time, now fresh from the shower, blonde hair dripping, long legs hop clicking 2 steps at a time down the front stairs, just in time for flank steak and garlic mashed potatoes, which normal passes ever so politely to the right. How to high-five the return of the missing, prostrate ourselves before the stranger, unexpectedly resurrected from pain in time for an ordinary Saturday. We swallow our songs of praise, sit on hands anxious to applaud, refuse the almost unbearable urge to break dance on the kitchen table. Here, we say to Normal, is the unfatted calf cooked to your liking. And over here is your favorite childhood dessert. So good to have you. Please come again. And of course, it's very hard to define normal, right? If any such thing even exists. I'd like to read a few poems too about just being a caregiver as a mother, being a caregiver for a mother. And so I'll read a sonnet and then a poem about navigating my mother's dementia while COVID was going on. This is called Dusk. The way the clouds hang low, it could be noon or late fall. She doesn't know the season or the time. In her mind, the days make room for meals, for bathroom trips. No reason to remember where, why. She knows someone will arrive to take her there, will know the when of her leaving, the coat she'll need to wear to brace herself from cold. Perhaps it's snow that filters out the light. Perhaps it's dusk, the long chill drawing close. And yet she hopes it's spring, late day, the world's worries hushed as she slips now towards sleep. Always the gray darkens to night. She does not know the day. And I think in some ways that poem ties in with the whole part of seeing things in this book, in this collection, whether it's your own personal vision, whether you're caregiving for someone else, whether you're navigating this blurry line of truth and lie in society. Another poem about my mother. During COVID, I used to sit outside quite a bit in our backyard, and I would call my mother every day on the phone. And there was a rabbit that always appeared in our backyard. I grew kind of attached to this rabbit, and I associated this rabbit with speaking to my mother, who was in Arizona near where my sister lives. Um, and one day I came out and the rabbit had died, and that was upsetting on several levels. Still life with rabbits and phone. It is only a rabbit hunkered down in this fenced-in backyard, 2,000 miles from her, 91 and frail, inside the locked assisted living apartment, not here. Each day, across invisible sound waves, my mother and I name and rename the hare, the bunny, the cottontail, the lapin, the breathing bundle of fur and ears, hopping in and out of our words, memories, what we string across miles and years. and I have fallen in love with the rabbit who returns each evening to a small patch of dying grass in the middle of central Pennsylvania, while my mother in Arizona suggests as names Peter or Hoppy or Hope. It is only a rabbit, but one morning when my husband and son find it dragged and gnawed, its insides exposed to the bloody black world, my mouth goes dry. No way to shape the absence, hare, bunny, cottontail, lappin, non-breathing bundle of fur and ears. Like this, time hops backwards and forwards. Hours sprawl in the dead grass. My mother forgets the hare, bunny, cottontail, lappin, doesn't recall the namings, the conversations. Are you sure? She whispers over the phone. Are you sure I'm in Phoenix? Are you certain it was a rabbit? When I next spy a small gray rabbit stretched out near the fence, I dial her number, exclaim, what shall we call him? What? Hare, bunny, cottontail, lappin, she lists. Then, just like that, she lands again on hope. And I'll read this short. I'll end with this short reading, the final poem in the book, Ode to Everything. Enough of the lamentations. Open the window and sing. The world is awash with world, color dripping globe always tilting into some ah or another. Clouds stretching wide, plump happiness. Even in the noisy stage show of showers, such sunny ovations. And the birds, overpopulating every poem, swoop here for free. Swallow, hawk, robin, gull, eagle, what else can be written but wings that wave horizon to horizon? And enough of windows, praise doors, step out with arms opened and eyes gathering vim and vision, grandeur trailing from worm and woodchuck, branch puzzles of woods, open boat of breeze, all brimming with hey and hallelujah, and celebrate such green giving of thanks, such miraculous mercy of earth, calm valley, and even this rugged, rocky chain we climb now as family, claiming praise as respite, holding close each breaking day, dangerous yet divine in all its gorgeous glory.
That reading was absolutely stunning. The poems are wonderful. They are so rich and layered. One of the things that I loved about the reading was the way that you beautifully handle the dichotomy in so many situations, because you talked about grief and relief. You talked about being a caregiver and wanting to find some sense of comfort yourself. You talked about lies and truth and doubt and hope. All of that is so wonderfully present in your work, and yet you always find a way to come down on the side of hope. When you were writing these poems, was it a constant question or a surprise to see where the poems would take you?
I think one of the things that I like so much about poetry is that, and writing in general, is that it's always a surprise to me. I don't always, I don't usually know where I'm going. I'll have an idea, but the poem kind of weave their way around, right? And you end up someplace that you didn't expect, and yet it seems like the right place when you get there. So I guess that there's a mixture of that hope and discovery throughout.
Beautiful answer. Which poems did you start writing with this collection?
Hmm. I think the very first poem that I wrote almost all of this book at the residency. So I sat down and I forced myself to write 3 poems a day, drafts. So they weren't, finished, polished poems. But I think just getting it all out really helped. I think the very first poem that I wrote was called Tip, that's in the collection, and it's about things being on the tip of the tongue and my mother's not being able to quite to get at what you're trying to say. And that whole process of trying to write, trying to get the right words, seeing her struggle with doing that, also led to a lot of poems about memory, the shape of memory, how those change throughout. And then, some other hard poems about, what my daughter had gone through physically and also emotionally, some struggles that she dealt with, things that I had dealt with in my past. I think our own experiences give us empathy for others, and I think writing helps us lean on that empathy to see other people's experiences. Even if we haven't had the exact same experiences, writing helps us kind of understand that other point of view, I think.
Nicely said. When you were describing your role as a caretaker, both for your mother and also trying to help your daughter who had her own challenges, what helped you with that process? Because that can be a very difficult task, especially if it goes on for months and months.
My husband was a huge help. My son was a huge help. I was, far away from my mother, so my sister was doing kind of the day-to-day caregiving. So that was hard because I felt like I didn't have any control. I mean, all the control I had was to talk with her, and to talk with her as much as I could. And sometimes, you can't always get someone to help her with the phone in the living place. And I think also when we were struggling with a lot of things with the family, I didn't get much writing done. I had to wait till I was kind of separate from that a little bit. So it felt pretty dark for a while because when you see somebody else in pain, of course you want to help them. And it's not always you don't always feel as if you are helping, even if you may be. Sometimes those things show up later.
So it sounds like during the time when you weren't able to write, a lot of poems were probably percolating in your mind. When you finally were able to put things down on paper and to let poetry move through you again, how did that impact you?
I was a little afraid. I was a little afraid to approach these hard topics with myself, with my mother, with my daughter. It was a little scary. And I think it helped that one of the other writers at the residency said it doesn't matter if you ever show these to anybody. And, these are the things that I've told my own students, just to get them out, just to address them. But I think that was freeing for me to hear so that I just worked on, writing the poems, not necessarily thinking that I would ever publish them or that I would show them to anybody else or I would send them out, but just to start kind of grappling with some of these topics that I'd been kind of putting aside for a while.
Well, as a fan of your work, I am so glad that you did grapple with those topics because so many people have been there and are still there and find tremendous comfort in reading poems by someone who has approached that process with empathy, compassion, and honesty.
Thank you. That is one thing that I began to realize after I did start sharing the poems or publishing them or giving readings, including some of these, that there are a lot of people, and of course I knew this in my head, but I think emotionally accepted it more, that there are a lot of people who've gone through similar things. And it helps to kind of share that and to create that sense of community and kind of a shared bond of understanding how other people feel um, when they're in that position of trying to help others, and also the idea of self-care, I think.
Very well put. You're right that when someone is in a situation like that, it can feel very isolating. And oftentimes you don't have a sense of community. But with your book, you have poems that can comfort you at any time. You can open it at 1 a.m. if you're struggling. You can open it at 5 p.m. if you're trying to help someone who is having a bad day. The poems create a sense of community that wouldn't be there otherwise for many people.
I'm glad. Thank you.
How long did it take you to write the poems in this book?
Well, I got the basis, the foundation for most of them within this 3 week period at the writing residency. But that was in 2018. So I sent the poems out and the book shifted and, took different shapes. I took poems out. Some of the poems that were in the Museum of My Daughter's Mind and another book were originally in this book. And so I shifted those kind of things around. So it evolved over 5 or 6 years, but I was sending it out that entire time. And, it placed in some contests. I sent it out again. I revised it. I reordered things. So, it was quite a long process.
I'm sure that would be very comforting for many writers who are also working with poems over months and sometimes years.
Oh, yeah. It's, it never comes quickly. So I have a number of books that are kind of coming out together now, but one of them I wrote 20 years ago. One of them I wrote more recently. This one I wrote, in 2018 and kept tinkering with. So it's a long process for sure.
One writer described this book as traversing rooms of sorrow and rooms of singing. Why was it important for you to include both?
I think, as I mentioned when I decided to start the odes, partly just for my own sanity to look at both sides of things. And also that's life, isn't it? I mean, we have a mix of things all the time. We can feel, really in the darkest depths of despair and with kind of no way out. But then, we walk outside and our neighbor smiles at us and, not that things are simplistic like that, but there's still some light there, right? Just to have that sense of community with others who, yes, they have maybe experienced something kind of similar, and have gotten through it. So sometimes it takes a very long time, but life is a mix of those very tough times and also those times of gratitude and joy.
Nice. The poem suggests that even at midlife, we may not always know how to see clearly. Does learning to see take a lifetime?
I think in many ways it does because we're always experiencing new things, right? So um, those new experiences help us understand more about ourselves, more about other people, more about the world. So that helps us see more clearly. But things are always shifting. So sometimes you think you have it figured out, and no, you don't at all, or you just kind of keep noticing what's around you and keep learning, keep experiencing.
The poems also suggest that we don't see clearly until we can see with hope and compassion.
Mm. Oh, that's interesting. I hope that is true. I mean, I by nature am a more optimistic person, but you don't always feel that way, right? And you grasp at what is around you. You search out other people. You try to figure out what you think through maybe writing. And that's one of the ways that I kind of cope with the world, both the positive and the negative things, is trying to figure out what I think, what I believe, what I understand by looking at it through the lens of writing.
Very nice. How has poetry helped you learn to see or to see in different ways?
Mm. Well, I think, writing is really about observing and noticing the small details and the connections between events, circumstances, people, the natural world. I'm always kind of looking for kind of connections and that slowing down process, not rushing through things. I mean, I tend to be a workaholic. I tend to make myself very busy, so it's hard for me to kind of slow down. But one of the things that writing does is it makes you slow down, engage with even the minute things, and pay attention to what's happening.
Nice. What helps you see with love and hope?
Oh, um, I don't know. I am a person of faith, so that certainly helps. And I think sometimes the experiences that we've had, some tough things that I've been through in my life, I think opens up opens your eyes in some ways to understand maybe what others have gone through as well, and to think about, how they might be feeling, try to stand in their shoes a little bit more. So I think that helps a little bit. So if there's anything good about maybe having some tough experiences yourself, is that it allows you maybe to understand others even more.
In the poems, the speaker also deals with traumatic memories. How does that fit in to this collection?
I am not particularly good at confronting my own traumas. I tend to push things away, push things down but I think that seeing other people in pain or struggling helps you understand that hmm, some of the more difficult things that I wrote about in my own life are things that I haven't written about for a while because I felt like I set them aside and I wanted to move on. And so I think once again, seeing other people in pain and struggling in some ways reminds you of what you yourself have been through, but also allows for more compassion too. And thinking about, what it is like to see the world when you've just been through some difficult things. And so that helps you kind of reach out, maybe, makes you think, okay, well, give some slack here to some person who may have responded a certain way, because there's always other stories going on in people's lives, right? There's always other things happening that you don't see on the surface. But a lot of people don't like to be labeled as a victim, you know. Um, you don't want to be seen for some of the only you don't want to be seen only for some of the things that you've experienced or some of the things that other people have experienced. So you want to make that connection. I think that understanding your own experiences and your own traumas leads to more compassion for others, or it can. And and it's easy to kind of push those away and not address them. But sometimes when you see other people also struggling, it reminds you of those, but also reminds you of the kind of the hope that's there of moving forward.
Come back next month for part 2 when Marjorie talks about her other new book in the Museum of My Daughter's Mind.